Welcome to this session of Q&A. So let's hop right in. The first question is from Rick, and he asks, how long of a fast do you recommend before lab tests? This is a great question and one that I like answering because if you fast too long or not long enough, you can really throw off your lab values and they can be skewed. And you might think you're high, low, optimal, and really it was just the timing of your fasting. So I suggest fasting for about 12 to 14 hours prior to most labs, unless it doesn't matter that you're fasting. Some labs, it doesn't matter if you're fasting or not, but for most metabolic labs, it is recommended to fast or it's going to throw them off. So for metabolic labs, I recommend 12 to 14 hours of fasting. I don't recommend doing long fasts prior to a lab draw. Some people think, oh my gosh, I got a lab draw coming up. I'm gonna, do a 3-day fast and try to get my labs into optimal range. That is just going to skew things. It's probably going to skew your cholesterol panel and it's going to skew your triglycerides because you're going to be tapping into the stored fat and you might, see elevated triglycerides when really you have pretty good control. And not to say that can't happen, here and there, but for the most part, you only want to fast about 12 to 14 hours. And the several days leading up, again, I know I have a big community that does intermittent fasting and timed eating, but you don't want to do a lot of long fasts like the 3, 4, 5. I would be safe with 4 to 5 days prior to your lab draw. So you can get a pretty normalized pattern of eating before you go to that lab draw. Now, I think for most people, they'd be okay with 2 meals daily leading up to that, as long as they're sufficient in protein and they're, meeting their macronutrients. But if you are somebody who's, and I'll talk about this a little bit in a question coming up, but if you're somebody who's always fasting all morning and hasn't eaten breakfast in weeks, months, years, you can really throw off your cortisol pattern. And that happened to me. So I'll talk about that more in a few minutes. But the main thing is you want to fast for about 12 to 14 hours. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to do all these long fasts leading up to a lab draw, because then you're not going to really get a true accurate depiction of what is actually going on. With that being said, you do want to make sure that there is 12 to 14 hours in there as well, especially for metabolic labs. Because then you get, you get an accurate sense of what your glucose is doing in a fasted state, what your fasting insulin is doing, and then a true level of lipids as well. Now for leptin, that's, and this is a hormone I've just started talking more about, and it's really helpful to see where your leptin is at, because if leptin is off, fat burning, signaling is off, and we don't want that. And a lot of times, if you are insulin resistant, you're also leptin resistant. So if you're testing for leptin, that's another hormone that you want to be fasting for 12 to 14 hours to get a real, true, accurate reading. Some doctors will say, or some physicians or providers, whoever's ordering your lab kit, will say you don't need to fast for leptin, and that's not true. It won't be accurate unless you're fasted 12 to 14 hours. A lot of providers don't have much experience with leptin, the hormone leptin. So that's why it's really important to make sure you're fasting 12 to 14 hours if you do get a leptin draw. And if this is something new that you've never heard of, you can definitely work with me and I can help you to get that ordered. If your physician or provider won't order it for you, and I can help you interpret the results. But I am really recommending to my students now that are coming into my academy and my new courses that I'm building to look and see where your leptin is at, because it's a really good indicator of, where we should start you nutritionally, if you should be fasting at all, and where to go, where to start, where to go. And a lot of times with people with leptin resistance have very high levels of leptin. For women, you want to be between 7 and 10, men about 4 to 9-ish, somewhere in there. It's a little bit different for men. They can have a little bit less leptin. But it's important to know if you're really high leptin resistance, or if your leptin's too low, that can be a problem too, because that usually people with low leptin are people who have been chronically fasting, over dieting, calorie restricted. Maybe they've been keto, carnivore, or carnivore for years, and they just don't have a lot of leptin. So we kind of treat those two issues the same way, but there is a little nuance there as well. So generally for metabolic panels, 12 to 14 hours, and some don't need fasting at all. And then I do want to point out, because I am starting to look at cortisol patterns a lot for my students as well. Looking at cortisol patterns, sometimes, it's helpful to see a melatonin pattern, but usually if your cortisol pattern is off, your melatonin level or your melatonin panel or balance is off too, like your melatonin pattern. So with the cortisol pattern, it doesn't really matter if you're fasting, but you do want to take it 4 times throughout the day, because if you just get one cortisol reading, which a lot of doctors say, okay, I'll do your cortisol, do a blood test, do it in your blood test in the morning. That doesn't really tell you what your pattern is throughout the day. And you really want to know what your pattern is, because cortisol rises and falls at different times. So you really want to know what that is throughout the day, because even if it's high or low in the morning, you still want to know if it's coming down where it should, or if it's high at night. That can be very, very problematic for sleep. And we do want to know that. So you are looking for a 4-point cortisol saliva test is what I recommend people get. You can measure it in the blood, but you're not going to do that 4 times a day. So rather than doing that, cortisol testing is a lot easier. And I do have home kits that I send for my students, but you can certainly ask your provider for a 4-point cortisol 4-point cortisol saliva test. And you basically spit into some test tubes 4 times throughout the day and get those cortisol levels. You get those readings 4 times throughout the day. Okay, so that is question number 1. Question 2 is from Barbara. She says, I am skinny but insulin resistant. Can your program help me? Oh, yes. This was me, Barbara. I was not overweight, but I was insulin resistant, and it caused a slew of issues. I've since reversed my insulin resistance, and my insulin is now within normal range. I like to see fasting insulins between 2 and 6. Mine, I don't know. After a couple of years of carb control and intermittent fasting, it was 10.5. So I think mine was pretty high. I don't really know. And now it's in the normal range, but it took me a while to correct it, because I think I was insulin resistant for well over 20 years. I think this kind of started for me in college, is where I really did some damage on my microbiome and my eating habits, and develop insulin resistance and all of that. Like, my lighting environment was horrible in college, like most people are. And little side note, I honestly think college is the time where a lot of these issues, if they haven't developed already with cortisol and insulin resistance, like that's a place where things are just going really awry, because so much changes in your environment all at once. So anyway, yes, I can definitely help you. And a lot of people with insulin resistance are of normal weight. So just because your weight is normal doesn't mean you can't have dysregulated blood sugar and dysregulated insulin patterns and dysregulated leptin, which I have already talked about. But I would get I got my blood sugar and cholesterol panels done very regularly. I used to be a health coach for a big hospital system. And every year I worked in employee health, and every year we had to get our our health assessment done for our health insurance. And always normal. I was always in the optimal range for blood sugar and cholesterol. And, I never thought anything of fasting insulin, because I was not taught about it until I learned about it on my own recently. And it just so much made sense after I found out I had insulin resistance. being hungry after I ate meals and, feeling like I couldn't go for more than a couple of hours without eating, having sugar cravings, having carbohydrate cravings, being bloated a lot. All of that was exacerbated by insulin resistance. So I have since corrected it. And then, of course, I put together my Low Insulin Academy, which teaches people exactly how to reverse their insulin resistance. And I've had, at this point, thousands of students go through there. And inside the academy, I can help you personally. So that is really nice. You get all of the pre-recorded lessons. There's 35 pre-recorded lessons, which I'll be adding a few in. But I have you download an app when you enroll in the program, and that app connects you directly to me. I don't have, other health coaches working with you. It's me. And so you can voice memo me, you can text me, you can upload your labs into this app, and I can see what's going on, and my students love it. They just leave me voice memos, and as soon as I can get back to them, I do. And we have like some of my students have like just like hours of conversation. So make sure to take advantage of that if that's something that you think would benefit you if you have insulin resistance. And I am adding in lessons as soon as I could get them developed. I've had so much going on with my family and personal life that it's everything I can do just to get a podcast out weekly. But I will be adding very, very necessary lessons into my Low Insulin Academy on our lighting environment and how that plays such a huge role with insulin resistance, because if you're not careful, you can throw your cortisol levels off pretty quickly if your lighting environment is sabotaged. And it also can really dysregulate blood sugar, because lighting plays a huge role with insulin resistance and blood sugar regulation. So this is something that has been missing. I will admit it. I was missing this with my students, and I'm so glad I know about it now. And I'm learning as much as I can so that I can help you that way. And a lot of people, they make a lot of great headway in Low Insulin Academy, but there's always a few outliers that are like, I'm doing everything, and my blood sugars aren't optimized. Well, this is what was missing: the lighting environment and making sure that's optimized, especially if cortisol is dysregulated, which I'll talk about in the next question, because this happened to me. I intermittent fasted for, oh gosh, 6 years probably. I still do. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like eating all the time. I'm not snacking. I'm still, practicing time restricted eating every single day. I am not a snacker. I'm not a night eater, but I have started to eat breakfast within, hour or two of getting up. Typically, right now, it's about the longest time of the year in Wisconsin, and that sun's coming up at 5 a.m. And I am not about to start eating at 5:30 or 6. I just can't do it. So anyway, there are nuances to this, but I eat earlier than I used to, that's for sure. And if I'm going to intermittent fast, it's through dinner. I just, some days I'm not hungry for dinner, and I listen to my body and say, okay, I'm going to do 18 hours of fasting today or whatever it is. So anyway, you can, if you're inside the academy, I can walk you through all that, but the lighting component was missing, and how strategic that is for reestablishing healthy cortisol patterns and healthy melatonin patterns. These are very, very important. If you don't have a healthy cortisol pattern, that is in the, what do we want to call it? It's an upstream hormone. Cortisol and melatonin are upstream hormones from insulin. So that's why, and and the sex hormones. So if those hormones are dysregulated, it's hard, even doing everything with food and stress and exercise with correcting insulin resistance. If your lighting environment is off, you can still struggle with that. So we know that this happened to me, and I got dysregulated cortisol, which may have been I might have had that even before I started intermittent fasting. And then intermittent fasting through breakfast every single day just exacerbated the issue for me. So again, I'm putting together a course. Oh my gosh, I want 3 courses out. I have them like all in my head. So I want cortisol, the cortisol calm. I'm calling my new course. I want back to basics out, where it's just like, what the heck do we do when we're chronically ill? And I want family foundations out, which is a course for families, and especially with kids who are struggling with weight issues and chronic issues. So I haven't forgot about those, but oh my goodness, I have been through the ringer with my parents since the beginning of the year. So hopefully I get those out really, really soon. And, there'll be some similarities in the courses, but they'll just be a little bit different for different people. Okay. So anyway, yes, I can help you if you're thin. You just don't do as much intermittent fasting, but we work on regulating other things to correct that blood sugar. And we really key in on nutrition. We key in on where to do your exercise. We key in on sleep, and we key in on lighting, so that you can correct that insulin resistance, even if you are thin and don't want to lose weight, because the body is self-correcting. So even if you're underweight with insulin resistance, and there's plenty of people, because just because you have insulin resistance doesn't automatically mean you're overweight. That just doesn't ring true. There's plenty of people out there who are underweight with insulin resistance and blood sugar issues. It doesn't just happen when you're overweight. So I can definitely help you. The body is self-correcting. So if you're underweight, we can help you get to an optimal weight there as well. We want to be strong. We want to have mitochondria that is functioning optimally. We want to recharge the energy in our bodies, and we want to regulate our blood sugar. And that's what I teach you in my courses. Okay. Question 3 is from Shelly. How do I fast when I have sleep issues that I suspect are from blood sugar issues? I have tried keto and it seems to make my sleep worse. Okay, Shelly, this is the thing. I don't want you doing much intermittent fasting if you have sleep issues, because it's counterintuitive, or counterproductive, I should say. That's what I meant. It's counterproductive. So if you have sleep issues, your body is stressed and not healing, and you throw intermittent fasting or these long fasting protocols into the mix, it's probably going to make your sleep worse. So we have to have that sleep optimized and you feeling rested before we move on to intermittent fasting. The other thing that sleep deprivation does is drive insulin resistance and make it worse, and drive blood sugar dysregulation. So when you have just one poor night's sleep, say you get 5 hours of sleep or less, and it's just erratic, not restful sleep, you are insulin resistant the entire next day to at least a 50% degree. If you already have some insulin resistance and blood sugar issues, it's more. Like, these are in healthy people, you're 50% more insulin resistant. So it's very substantial. So the first thing we need to do is optimize your sleep. I just interviewed a sleep expert, Molly Eastman, just last week. So her episode will be coming up real soon. And she gives us a lot of good pointers as to how to optimize our sleep. And she's got a program and a course called Sleep is a Skill. So I would, she's fantastic. She knows her stuff, as you will hear. But we need to optimize our sleep. And a lot of times that's coming back to our circadian rhythm and having a strong circadian rhythm. So my cortisol calm course will also help with this. And my back to basics course will also help with this, because that's got to come first. And if your cortisol is dysregulated, your melatonin is dysregulated, you are not going to sleep well. You are not going to, you might have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. And intermittent fasting is going to become very counterproductive. And I have said that from the get-go. I mean, that's not something new that I've said. Like, you need to have optimized sleep before you throw in these other healing modalities. Fasting is very, very healing. As you know, I used to call my podcast Fast to Heal. but we want to do it in the correct way, especially with women. Like fasting needs to be nuanced with women, especially if you're still cycling. I mean, we can really damage our hormones. But like I said, when our cortisol and melatonin, those are upstream. They come right from the pregnenolone hormone, which is like kind of the master hormone, and they're like next. And all of these, the sex hormones and insulin are below that. So if you have dysregulated cortisol and melatonin, you're going to have all of these other hormones dysregulated as well. So number one, if your sleep is dysregulated, you need to start working on lighting. You need to go out and see the sunrise if at all possible, as many days as you can. You don't need to sit out there for half an hour. I'm talking like 2 or 3 minutes watching that sunrise, giving your body the signal that it's morning and to start producing cortisol. This is going to set you up for good sleep later in the day. Okay, so that morning sun triggers your body to start producing cortisol and other hormones and all these other things that are happening. But then it's also signaling to your pineal gland to make melatonin about 16 hours later so that you can sleep. Okay, it's all very intricate. So that's the first thing, like watch the sunrise and then take light breaks as much as you can. The other thing is UVA rise. And I've talked a little bit about these different lights, but you can go and download the app called Circadian. A lot of people are like, well, there's a whole bunch of them. It's called Circadian app. And look at and see like when your sun is rising where you are, when UVA comes up, when UVB is out, and when sunset, because UVA is where you produce serotonin. And that again is going to, signal your body all kinds of, restful things, but it's also, it's like stored, it's like serotonin is stored that so that it can later be converted to melatonin. So that is really like once you realize that and that this all connects to light, you can say, oh my gosh, like I had no idea that morning sunrise and UVA light outside without glasses, without contacts, if at all possible, without sunglasses, just being in that light and getting that light signal into your eyes is huge, because then the serotonin is clipped and made into melatonin later that day so that you can fall asleep and stay asleep. If you don't have enough melatonin produced, you're going to have trouble falling asleep, staying asleep. So that is number one, long roundabout answer to the question. But the other thing is, if you do, a lot of times sleep disturbances can be blood sugar related. So, you get your cortisol pattern back under control. It's a lot easier than to get the insulin and the blood sugar patterns back under control. But I can certainly work with you inside my academy, because I have had a lot of people who have hypoglycemia, too low of blood sugars, waking them up at night. And how you can kind of know if it's, I wake up somewhere between 2 and 4, usually right around 3:30. I wake up around that time almost every night, but it's not because of a blood sugar. It's just like my sleep cycles. Like I'm kind of coming out of my deep sleep time and a little bit of REM sleep. I usually, sometimes I go to the bathroom, sometimes I don't. And then, I continue sleeping. Hopefully I go back to sleep for a couple hours. Usually I do. But that's just my pattern. So I'm not waking up because I have low blood sugar, or, I'm waking up, I feel fine. Right. So that's the difference. And I've worn a continuous glucose monitor many, many times. And I know that I don't dip, too low, and that I can tie it back on a continuous glucose monitor. But some people are waking up because of hypoglycemia, their blood sugar dropping too low. And what happens is you might be sweaty, you might have heart palpitations, you might have had some really crazy dreams. This is a sign that your body's dropped blood sugar and cortisol was released, because cortisol comes to the rescue when your blood sugar is dropping. If you are bad at tapping into fat burning. So if you are fat adapted, meaning you can burn carbohydrates and you can burn fat and you can oscillate back and forth, which by the way is the whole point of Low Insulin Academy. I get you there. I get you from, being a sugar burner to being a sugar and fat burner and having metabolic flexibility so that this doesn't happen to you. But if you aren't good at tapping into body fat and you're a carbohydrate burner, which there are tons of people who are just, really good at burning carbs, but terrible at burning fat because of our lifestyle and because of the food that we eat in our American society. But if you're not good at tapping into body fat for fuel, your blood sugar starts to come down and tank, and your body goes into crisis mode, and cortisol is released, and you get all of these symptoms. So if that is you, what we need to work on is metabolic flexibility. And usually what I have you do is work on training your body to burn fat. So eating more fat and lowering carbs over time is really, really helpful. And it usually takes care of this issue. But yes, blood sugar stability is very important with sleep also, as is being metabolically flexible, so that when you go to sleep and you run out of carbs, like if maybe you've had a lower carb day or you've had a lot of exercise, it's not a big deal for your body, because it's like you have plenty of body fat, so you can burn that for fuel and keep your blood sugar, steady throughout the day. So no intermittent fasting until you have your sleep in a better place and where it's optimal. Sometimes female sex hormones can come into here too if you're perimenopause or menopausal. Sometimes progesterone replacement or optimizing, hormone replacement therapy can be helpful for your sleep too. Then once you have that regulated, then we can talk about doing some fasting protocols if necessary, doing them in a way that's not going to wreck your hormones and not going to wreck your cortisol, and dysregulate that as that happened to me. Okay, so question number 4, are there meal plans in your program, and are there recipes? So this is a question, another question that I like when people ask it, because I have sample meals in my program, and there's lots of downloads and handouts inside the academy. And sample meal plans is one. I have grocery lists in there. I have how to utilize leftovers. I have all kinds of handouts, protein, carbs, you name it. I do have sample meal plans in there, but I don't do meal plans. And I've talked about this before. I don't do meal plans because it doesn't teach you how to eat and properly, put together a healthy plate that's going to bring you to satiety. Everybody's so different with what they like. And, if they have specific foods that they don't tolerate, and they have sensitivities, their gut's really sensitive, and they seem a 2-week meal plan, and they can't eat half of it. Like, it just doesn't help you to learn how to put your plate together so that you have enough protein, you have healthy fats, and you have some strategic carbs and fiber in there. And so I teach you all about the macronutrients inside my course. And what are good options for all of them. And then I give you some guidelines as to where to start with, like protein and carbohydrate intake, but I don't give the same meal plan to everybody. I don't believe in that. I think personalized nutrition is a lot more important. So you won't find like a 2-week meal plan, like Shanna Husson wellness meal plan, because I just don't think that that's helpful for the vast majority of people. And then as far as recipes go, I do have a recipe book. It's online, it's downloadable. It's not paper, or it's not published, paperback, whatever you want to say. It's a download, but you can purchase that on my website. It has 85 low or real food recipes. They're mostly low carb, and they use real food, and they kind of follow the guidelines that I teach you inside the academy. But that recipe book is available on its own, or if you want to get the recipe book, you can just leave me a rating and review on whatever platform you're listening to, and I send it to you for free, because rating and reviews so help this podcast get a boost, and so other people can hear the information and heal also. So that is where we are at for meal plans and recipes, and that is it for this week's Q&A. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you learned something new.